You can't marry me, little one. I'm a monster, the Alpha King whispered, blood still dripping from his claws as 6-year-old Lyra pressed a dandelion crown onto his dark hair and declared with absolute certainty, when I grow up, I'll be your queen. 18 years later, Lyra's hands trembled as she ground wolfsbane into powder, the memory echoing like a ghost in her mind. The herb's bitter scent filled the small healing cottage, mixing with the morning mist that clung to the Moonridge Territory's pine forests. At 24, she'd become the pack's most trusted healer, though no one knew the truth about her bloodline, that she was the orphaned daughter of Marcus Silvermoon, former leader of the Omega Council. Lyra. Her adoptive mother, Elena, burst through the cottage door, her face pale as winter snow. He's coming. The Alpha King is coming here. The pestle slipped from Lyra's fingers, clattering to the floor. When? Today. There's been another disappearance, 3 wolves from the northern border this time. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. They say he's investigating personally. Lyra's wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, recognizing a name that had haunted her dreams for years. Darius Blackthorn. The boy who'd saved her life. The man Destiny had chosen as her mate, a bond she discovered during her first shift at 18 and had been running from ever since. We have to leave, Elena said, already moving toward the shelves where Lyra kept her few possessions. Pack your herbs. We can be gone within the hour. No. The word came out stronger than Lyra felt. I won't run anymore. Elena spun around, her eyes flashing gold. You don't understand what this means. If he sees you, if he realizes who you are, then maybe it's time. Lyra straightened, squaring her shoulders. I've spent 6 years hiding from a bond one never asked for. Maybe the moon goddess has had enough of our games. Before Elena could argue further, the cottage door exploded inward. A massive gray wolf, easily twice the size of any normal shifter, crashed through the entrance with 3 rogues snapping at his heels. Blood matted his silver-streaked fur, and his golden eyes Lyra would recognize anywhere, were beginning to dim. The rogues turned toward her, their lips pulled back in savage snarls. Without thinking, Lyra threw herself between them and the wounded Alpha King, her own wolf surging forward in protective fury. Power crackled through the air, ancient and primal, as her healer's magic flared to life. Back off, she snarled, and something in her voice made the rogues hesitate. That moment of hesitation was all the king needed. Despite his wounds, he lunged forward, his massive jaws closing around the throat of the nearest rogue. The other 2 fled, disappearing into the forest as quickly as they'd come. The great wolf collapsed, his breathing labored. Elena had pressed herself against the far wall, terror written across her features. She knew what this meant, what this moment would cost them all. Help me get him to the table, Lyra commanded, already shifting into healer mode. Her hands glowed with soft silver light as she assessed his injuries. 3 deep gashes across his ribs, a torn shoulder, and something worse, poison from rogue claws working its way through his system. As she worked, pouring her power into his wounds, the king's wolf form began to shimmer. Bones cracked and reformed, fur receded, and within moments, a man lay on her healing table. A man she'd never forgotten, despite the years that had changed them both. Darius Blackthorn had grown into the monster he'd once claimed to be, but in the most magnificent way. His dark hair was longer now, touched with premature silver at the temples. His face was all sharp angles and brutal beauty, marked by scars that spoke of countless battles. Even unconscious, power radiated from him in waves that made the air itself seem to hum. Lyra's hand stilled on his chest as those golden eyes suddenly opened, locking onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. Lyra. Her name fell from his lips like a prayer, rough with disbelief and something deeper. Something that made her wolf sing with recognition. The mate bond snapped into place between them, no longer something she could deny or run from. It hit with the force of a lightning strike, binding them together with invisible chains forged by the moon goddess herself. She felt his pain as her own, his strength flowing through their connection, his very soul calling to hers. You remember, she whispered, her silver eyes filling with tears she'd held back for years. I never forgot. His hand lifted shakily to touch her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. My little queen. You came back to me. Elena's sharp intake of breath reminded them they weren't alone. Darius's attention shifted to the older woman, and his expression hardened as recognition dawned. Elena Thornfield. Former Beta to the Omega Council. His voice dropped to a dangerous growl. You've been hiding her. She asked me to, Elena said quietly. After her father died, after the purge of the council, she was just a child who'd lost everything. She deserved a chance at a normal life. Normal? Darius struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his partially healed wounds. She's the daughter of an Omega Council leader and the destined mate of an Alpha King. There is nothing normal about what she is. Lyra stepped back, the weight of their combined stares suddenly too much. I didn't want this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to be anyone's queen. And I didn't want to be anyone's monster, Darius replied, his golden eyes never leaving hers. But here we are. The cottage fell silent except for the sound of their breathing and the distant howl of wolves calling to their king. Outside, Lyra could hear the approach of his royal guard. Dozens of powerful wolves who would expect answers she wasn't ready to give. They're coming, she said, backing toward the window. Darius rose from the table with fluid grace, ignoring Elena's sharp warning about his wounds. There's nowhere left to run, Lyra. You saved my life today. The debt between us can never be settled until you let me return the favor. I don't need saving. Don't you? He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. 3 wolves have disappeared from this territory. Something is hunting my people, and it's drawn me here, to you. Tell me that's not the moon goddess herself orchestrating our reunion. The cottage door opened again, this time admitting a tall woman with silver hair and cold blue eyes. Beta Commander Alexis Frost, Darius's right hand and the most feared enforcer in the kingdom. My king, she said, her gaze taking in the scene with calculating precision. We tracked the rogues sent here. Are you? Her words died as her attention landed on Lyra, and her nostrils flared. Impossible. Not impossible, Darius said quietly. Inevitable. Alexis dropped to one knee. Your Majesty's mate has been found. The formal words hung in the air like a death sentence. Lyra felt the walls closing in, felt the life she'd built crumbling around her. In the distance, more howls echoed through the forest, the entire royal pack calling their greeting to their future queen. Darius extended his hand to her, his golden eyes holding a mixture of command and plea. It's time, little one. Time to keep that promise you made all those years ago. Lyra stared at his outstretched hand, remembering the feel of dandelions in her small fingers, remembering the boy who'd called himself a monster but had saved her life anyway. Now he stood before her as a man, as a king, as the mate her soul recognized even as her mind rebelled. Lyra, he whispered her name like a prayer, and 18 years of separation crumbled in an instant. She realized with crystal clarity that her childhood promise hadn't just been the innocent words of a 6-year-old girl. It had been prophecy. It had been fate. And it may have sealed both their destinies in ways neither of them could yet understand. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. The silence in the cottage stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Lyra stared at Darius's outstretched hand, her heart hammering against her ribs as the weight of destiny pressed down on her shoulders. Outside, the royal guard's howls grew closer, their voices weaving together in an ancient song of recognition and submission to their future queen. I need air, she whispered, backing toward the door. No more running, Darius said firmly, but his hand dropped to his side. Not from me. Not from this. And certainly not from the truth. What truth? Elena demanded, stepping protectively closer to Lyra despite the futility of it. You found your mate. Isn't that enough? Darius's golden eyes never left Lyra's face as he spoke. I didn't come to Moonridge for the disappearances alone. I came because those disappearances are connected to Marcus Silvermoon's research. Research into forbidden Omega magic that supposedly died with him 18 years ago. Lyra's blood turned to ice. My father's work had nothing to do with. Your father was brilliant, Darius interrupted. Brilliant and dangerous. He believed that Omega magic could be pushed beyond its natural limits, that healers could tap into something older and more powerful than the moon goddess herself. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more threat than any shout. He was right. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her throat. That's impossible. Marcus would never. Marcus would do anything to protect his daughter, Darius said quietly. Including delving into magic that should have stayed buried. The question is, his gaze bored into Lyra's, what did he teach you before he died? Lyra's world tilted on its axis. Her father had died when she was 6, killed in what Elena had always called a territorial dispute. But as she looked into Darius's eyes, she saw the truth written there like words carved in stone. Her father hadn't died in any dispute. He'd been executed for his research, and Darius had known all along. You killed him, she breathed, the words scraping her throat raw. No. The denial came swift and sure. But I would have, if I'd had to. Your father was playing with forces that could have destroyed everything we are. When he died, when the council fell, I thought his secrets died with them. They did, Lyra said desperately. I was 6 years old. I don't remember anything about his work. Darius studied her face with the intensity of a predator scenting prey. Then explain why every wolf that's disappeared was found with traces of Omega magic in their blood. Magic that matches the signature your father was researching. The cottage door burst open, and Beta Commander Alexis Frost stepped inside, her silver hair gleaming in the filtered sunlight. Behind her came another figure, a man with dark hair and cruel green eyes that Lyra recognized from her nightmares. Marcus Thorne, Darius's other beta and the most ruthless enforcer in the kingdom. My king, Marcus said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as deadly. The perimeter is secure. The witch is contained. I'm not a witch, Lyra snapped, her power flickering to life around her hands like silver flames. I'm a healer. Marcus's laugh was like breaking glass. Healers don't leave psychic residue at crime scenes. Healers don't accidentally call to ancient magic that should have been forgotten centuries ago. He stepped closer, and Lyra caught the scent of violence and bloodshed that clung to him like cologne. You've been practicing your father's forbidden arts, haven't you, little Omega? I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus, Darius's voice carried a warning that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. But Marcus was already moving, producing silver shackles from his coat. Orders are orders, Your Majesty. The Council of Alphas wants her brought in for questioning. About the disappearances. About her father's research. About why she's been hiding from her destined mate for 6 years. Stay back, Lyra warned, her power flaring brighter. Elena whimpered behind her, pressed against the cottage wall like she was trying to disappear into the wood itself. Easy, sweetheart, Marcus crooned, approaching like she was a rabid animal. This can go easy or hard. Your choice. I said stay back. The silver fire around her hands exploded outward, washing over Marcus in a wave of pure magical energy. But instead of burning him, instead of driving him away, something else happened. Something that made every person in the cottage freeze in horror. The magic hit Marcus and passed right through him, as if he wasn't even there. But Lyra felt it connect with something else, something vast and hungry and utterly alien. For a split second, she was no longer in the cottage. She was somewhere dark and cold, surrounded by the stench of decay and old blood. She saw 3 wolves chained to walls of black stone, their eyes vacant and staring. She felt something ancient and malevolent turn its attention to her, felt it smile with a mouth full of shadows and broken promises. Found you, it whispered directly into her mind. My little anchor. My doorway home. Lyra screamed as the connection snapped, stumbling backward as the horrifying truth crashed over her like a tide of ice water. Her healing magic, Every time she'd used it to save a dying pack member, every act of mercy and compassion, had been feeding this thing. Had been giving it a pathway to their world. No, she gasped, staring at her hands in horror. No, that's not. I've been helping people. I've been saving lives. You've been opening doors, Marcus said coldly, the shackles clicking open in his hands. And now the council wants to know why. The council can go to hell, Darius snarled, stepping between Marcus and Lyra with fluid grace. She's under my protection. She's a threat to every pack in the kingdom, Marcus shot back. Look at her, Your Majesty. Look at what she just did. That wasn't healing magic, that was something older. Something darker. Lyra wanted to deny it, wanted to scream that they were wrong, but the memory of that voice, my little anchor, echoed in her skull like a death knell. How many times had she felt something watching her when she healed? How many times had she pushed her power beyond its natural limits because someone was dying and she couldn't let them go? I have to leave, she whispered, backing toward the window. If I'm connected to whatever's taking your people, then I have to go somewhere it can't follow. There is nowhere it can't follow, Darius said quietly. Not anymore. You've given it a taste of this world, Lyra. It won't stop until it has the rest. Then what do you want from me? The words came out as a broken sob. If I stay, I'm a threat. If I go, I'm still a threat. What am I supposed to do? You're supposed to trust me, Darius said, his voice gentle for the first time since he'd arrived. You're supposed to let me help you. Marcus snorted in disgust. Help her? Your Majesty, with respect, your judgment is compromised. The mate bond. The mate bond, Darius said conversationally, is the only thing standing between her and a silver bullet to the brain. So I suggest you choose your next words very carefully, Marcus. The threat hung in the air like smoke, acrid and choking. Alexis stepped forward, her hand resting on the pommel of her sword. My king, perhaps we should discuss this privately. No more private discussions, Darius said, his attention never wavering from Lyra. No more secrets. No more lies. He took a step toward her, his movements slow and deliberate, like he was approaching a wounded animal. I've been hunting you for 18 years, little queen. Not because I wanted to claim you or cage you, but because I knew this day would come. What day? Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. The day your power would become strong enough to breach the barriers your father died to create. Darius's eyes glowed with golden fire. Marcus Silvermoon didn't just research forbidden magic, Lyra. He found something. Something that had been locked away since the first days of our kind. And when he realized what he'd done, when he understood the magnitude of the threat, he used his own life force to create a prison. Elena made a sound like a wounded animal. You knew, she gasped. All these years, you knew what really happened to Marcus. I knew he sacrificed himself to save us all, Darius said simply. I knew he bound whatever he'd awakened to his bloodline, creating a lock that would hold as long as his daughter remained weak and untrained. His gaze found Lyra's again. I also knew that eventually, her power would grow beyond what the prison could contain. So you've been watching me, Lyra said numbly. Waiting for me to become dangerous enough to justify killing. No. The word came out rough with emotion. I've been preparing to protect you. Everything I've done, every territory I've conquered, every enemy I've crushed, every time I've been called the Monster King, was to build an army strong enough to stand against what your father awakened. The silence that followed was deafening. Lyra stared at him, trying to process what he'd just revealed. 18 years. He'd known about their mate bond since she was 6 years old, and instead of claiming her then, instead of taking the easy path, he'd spent nearly 2 decades turning himself into something powerful enough to shield her from threats she'd never even known existed. You made yourself into a monster, she whispered. For me. I made myself into a weapon, he corrected. The only weapon capable of killing gods and demons and everything in between. His smile was sharp as a blade. Though I suppose the end result is the same. Marcus stepped forward again, his patience clearly at an end. This is all very touching, Your Majesty, but we have a crisis on our hands. 3 wolves are missing, something ancient is stirring, and your mate is connected to it. The Council of Alphas wants answers. The Council of Alphas can kiss my, Darius began, but Lyra cut him off. He's right. The admission felt like swallowing broken glass. I can feel it. Whatever that thing is, it's been using me. Every time I healed someone, every time I pushed my power to save a life, I was feeding it. Making it stronger. She looked at her hands again, seeing them now as instruments of destruction rather than healing. How many people are going to die because of what I am? None, Darius said firmly. Because you're not going to be doing this alone anymore. The Council will never accept, Marcus started. The Council will accept whatever I tell them to accept, Darius snapped, his voice carrying enough alpha dominance to make even Marcus step back. Lyra is my mate, which makes her their queen. And queens, Marcus, are not arrested by their own subjects. Lyra felt something break inside her chest, some last, fragile hope that she might be able to walk away from all this unscathed. And if I don't want to be queen? If I don't want any of this? Darius looked at her for a long moment, his golden eyes holding depths of pain she was only beginning to understand. Then I'll help you find another way. But running isn't an option anymore, little one. Not when you're the key to stopping something that could destroy everything we've built. What if I'm not the key? Lyra asked desperately. What if I'm just the door it's been waiting to walk through? Then we'll seal the door, Darius said simply. Whatever it takes. The weight in those words made her shiver. She knew what he was offering, knew what, whatever it takes, meant when it came from the Monster King. If she couldn't be saved, if she couldn't be fixed, he would do what needed to be done. He would kill her himself rather than let her become the instrument of their destruction. And somehow, that promise was more comforting than anything else he could have said. Okay, she whispered, the word falling from her lips like a prayer or a curse. Okay. But I have conditions. Marcus snorted, but Darius nodded gravely. Name them. Elena goes free. Whatever happens, she doesn't get punished for hiding me. Lyra's voice grew stronger as she spoke. And the missing wolves, we find them first. Before any council meetings, before any ceremonies, before anything else. If I'm connected to whatever took them, then I'm responsible for getting them back. Agreed, Darius said without hesitation. And one more thing. Lyra lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. If the time comes when I can't be saved, when I become more danger than asset, you don't hesitate. You do what needs to be done. Lyra, Elena gasped. Promise me, Lyra insisted, her silver eyes never leaving Darius's face. Promise me you won't let whatever's inside my magic hurt innocent people. Darius was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft as silk and hard as steel. I promise you'll never become something you'd hate yourself for being. But I also promise that won't happen. We're going to find another way. How can you be so sure? His smile was sharp enough to cut. Because I've had 18 years to prepare for this day, little queen. And I've never lost a war yet. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and Lyra could swear she heard something howling in the distance that didn't sound quite like a wolf. The thing that had been feeding on her magic was stirring, and she had the terrifying feeling that their conversation had woken it up completely. But as Darius stepped closer and took her hand in his, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 6 years of running, hope. Dark and desperate and possibly doomed, but hope all the same. Come on, he said, his fingers warm and strong around hers. Time to go save some wolves. And despite everything, despite the horror of what she'd learned, despite the impossible situation they faced, Lyra found herself squeezing his hand back. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 3. The royal court of the Shadowmere Kingdom was nothing like the fairy tales Lyra had imagined as a child. Where she'd expected gleaming marble and golden tapestries, she found cold black stone and banners that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The massive throne room stretched before her like a cathedral dedicated to power and fear, its vaulted ceilings disappearing into shadows that moved independently of any light source. "Welcome home, little queen," Darius murmured beside her, his hand a steady presence on her lower back as they walked the length of the throne room. Every step echoed like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. Home. The word felt foreign on her tongue. For 18 years, home had been Elena's cottage, the scent of healing herbs, and the simple rhythm of village life. This place, with its watching eyes and whispered conversations, felt more like a beautiful prison. "She's smaller than I expected," a voice drifted from somewhere in the gathered crowd of nobles. "Hardly looks like queen material." "The rumors say she's been hiding among common pack wolves," another whispered. "Living like a peasant. I heard she can barely control her power. That she's the reason those wolves disappeared." Lyra's steps faltered, but Darius's hand pressed more firmly against her spine. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "They're testing you. Show weakness now, and they'll never stop." Easy for him to say. He'd grown up in this world of veiled threats and political maneuvering. She'd grown up mixing healing potions and tending to scraped knees. The only battles she'd ever fought were against infection and injury, not against people who smiled while sliding knives between your ribs. At the far end of the throne room, a woman rose from a chair that was almost as elaborate as the king's throne itself. Lady Valora Blackthorn was everything Lyra wasn't: tall, elegant, with silver blonde hair that caught the light like spun moonbeams. Her dress was cut from midnight blue silk that probably cost more than most pack wolves made in a year, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Nephew," she said, gliding toward them with the fluid grace of a predator. "You've returned at last. And brought a guest." The pause before guest was deliberate, calculated to remind everyone present that Lyra's status was far from certain. Darius's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Aunt Valora," he replied, his voice carrying just enough edge to make several nearby nobles step back. "Allow me to present Lyra Silvermoon, my mate and your future Luna Queen." Valora's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered behind her pale blue eyes. "How wonderful. Though I do hope the poor dear is prepared for the challenges that come with such an elevated position." The threat was there, wrapped in silk and courtesy, but unmistakably real. Lyra had been at court for less than an hour, and she already had an enemy. One with significant power and influence, judging by the way other nobles watched Valora's reaction. "I'm prepared for whatever comes," Lyra said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I've spent my whole life dealing with things that could kill me if I made a mistake." Several courtiers chuckled, clearly taking her words as a reference to her healing work. But Valora's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she'd heard something else entirely in that statement. "How quaint," the older woman said. "I look forward to our conversations, dear. There's so much you'll need to learn about court life. So many traditions to master." "I'm sure there are," Lyra replied, meeting Valora's gaze directly. "Though I suspect I'll learn quickly. I usually do." This time, Valora's smile slipped just a fraction. Before she could respond, Darius stepped smoothly between them. "Aunt, we'll need the West Wing prepared for Lyra's residence. And I trust you'll ensure she has everything she needs to feel welcome." "Of course," Valora said, her voice honey-sweet again. "Though I should mention, Ambassador Kane from the Shadow Pack is expected to arrive tomorrow for the alliance discussions. I do hope that won't complicate things." Darius went very still beside Lyra, and she felt something dangerous ripple through their mate bond. "What alliance discussions?" "The ones we've been negotiating for months," Valora replied innocently. "Surely you remember? The marriage contract between you and Alpha Kane's daughter would unite our packs, Anne." "There will be no marriage contract," Darius cut her off, his voice dropping to a growl that made every wolf in the room bare their necks in submission. "I have found my mate." "Oh." Valora's hand fluttered to her throat in a gesture of mock surprise. "But surely you understand the political implications?" We've given our word. Our honor is at stake. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Our honor, Darius said carefully, will survive the disappointment of the Shadow Pack. What won't survive is anyone who suggests my mate is somehow insufficient for the role of Luna Queen. The threat was clear, and Lyra watched as several nobles suddenly found reasons to study their shoes. But she also noticed others, those whose expressions hadn't changed, who watched the confrontation with calculating eyes. Velora wasn't the only one who saw her as a problem to be solved. Of course not, Velora said smoothly. I would never suggest such a thing. I merely thought, well, given the young lady's inexperience with court life, will be remedied quickly, Darius finished. As will any other concerns that arise. The double meaning hung in the air like smoke, acrid and choking. Lyra felt a chill run down her spine as she realized what she was seeing. This wasn't just political maneuvering, this was war. A cold, civilized war fought with words and subtle threats, but war nonetheless. And she was the prize both sides were fighting over. 3 hours later, Lyra stood alone in the center of her new chambers, trying to process everything that had happened. The West Wing rooms were beautiful, all silk hangings and carved furniture, but they felt like a gilded cage. Every luxury imaginable, but with guards at the door and windows that overlooked a 100-foot drop to the courtyard below. Not exactly what you expected, I imagine. She spun to find Darius standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He'd shed his formal court attire for simple black pants and a white shirt that made his dark hair look even darker. In the soft candlelight, he looked less like the feared monster king and more like the boy who'd saved her life all those years ago. Your aunt wants me dead, Lyra said without preamble. And probably half your court agrees with her. Probably more than half, Darius admitted, closing the door behind him. Velora has been positioning herself as the power behind my throne for years. She's convinced the other nobles that I need her guidance, her connections. And my presence threatens that. Your presence changes everything. He moved closer, his golden eyes never leaving her face. Not just for Velora, but for me. For the entire kingdom. Changes how? Lyra asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Darius was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Do you know what they call me, Lyra? The titles they've given me over the years? The Monster King, she said softly. I've heard. Among others. The Bloody Crown. The Wolf's Bane. Death Walker. His smile was sharp and bitter. I've earned every one of them. There are packs that tell stories about me to frighten their children. Alphas who surrender territory rather than face me in battle. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to understand what I've become. What I've had to become. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. I've killed 17 alphas in single combat. Destroyed 3 entire packs that threatened our borders. Executed dozens of wolves for crimes ranging from treason to simple defiance. Lyra's breath caught. Darius. Some of them deserved it, he continued relentlessly. Some were threats to innocent lives, monsters that needed stopping. But others. He shrugged, the gesture somehow more terrifying than any dramatic confession could have been. Others were simply in my way. Stop, Lyra whispered, backing away from him. Why are you telling me this? Because 3 of those executions were wolves who threatened you. The words fell between them like stones into still water. Marcus Greythorn, who hired assassins to kill the Silvermoon bastard before she could claim her heritage. Beta Sarah Nightshade, who spread rumors that you were a dark witch who needed to be burned. Alpha Thomas Ironwood, who offered a bounty for your capture. Lyra stared at him in horror. You killed them, for me? I killed them because they were threats to my mate, Darius corrected. Because they would have hurt you, and I couldn't allow that. I never asked you to. You didn't need to ask. His voice was quiet, matter of fact, as if they were discussing the weather. It's what mates do, Lyra. We protect each other. even from threats the other doesn't know exist. Lyra sank into one of the silk-upholstered chairs, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. How many people are dead because of me? None, Darius said firmly. They're dead because of their own choices. Because they decided to threaten what's mine. I'm not a thing to be owned, she snapped, anger flaring hot and bright in her chest. No, he agreed. You're not. But you are mine, just as I am yours. That's what the mate bond means, Lyra. We belong to each other, completely and irrevocably. The certainty in his voice made her shiver. This wasn't the boy she'd crowned with dandelions. This was a man who'd built an empire on blood and bone, who spoke of murder like other people discussed their daily routine. And he'd done it all for her. I don't know if I can live with this, she whispered. You won't have to, Darius said gently. Not alone. Before she could ask what he meant, pain exploded through her skull like a lightning strike. The room spun away, replaced by visions that crashed over her like a tide of darkness and blood. She was in a cavern lit by torches that burned with green flame. The 3 missing wolves were there, chained to walls of black stone, but they weren't wolves anymore. Their eyes glowed with the same green fire as the torches, and their mouths were full of fangs that belonged to no natural predator. They turned toward her in perfect unison, their voices speaking as one. Soon, little anchor. Soon we will have enough strength to cross over completely. The scene shifted, and she was standing in a laboratory filled with arcane symbols and bubbling potions. A man who looked like an older version of herself bent over a table covered in ancient texts, his silver hair wild with exhaustion and desperation. I have to find a way, her father's voice echoed around her. She's just a child. She deserves better than this legacy. Another shift, and she was watching her father perform some kind of ritual, his blood dripping onto a circle of carved runes. But something went wrong. The circle exploded in a shower of green fire, and something vast and hungry poured through the gap he'd created. Marcus, a voice whispered, ancient and terrible. You have opened the door at last. And your daughter, she will be the key to keeping it open forever. Lyra jerked back to awareness with a scream that shattered 3 of the windows in her chamber. Darius caught her as she collapsed, his arms strong and warm around her shaking body. What did you see? He demanded urgently. My father, she gasped, her throat raw from screaming. He didn't just research forbidden magic, he opened a door. A door to something that shouldn't exist. She grabbed the front of his shirt, her eyes wide with terror. The missing wolves aren't dead, Darius. They're being turned into something that's part wolf, part vampire, part something else. Darius's expression went grim. A hybrid army. It's building an invasion force, Lyra whispered. Using the connection my father created, the one that passed to me when he died. Every time I use my power, I make the door wider. I make it easier for them to cross over. Then we stop using your power, Darius said simply. It's too late for that. Lyra's voice was hollow with despair. The door is already open. And the thing on the other side, it's not just any ancient monster. It's an Omega like me. An Omega that made itself into something else, something that feeds on death and darkness. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her cheeks. It's coming, Darius. And when it arrives, it's going to turn this world into something unrecognizable. Before Darius could respond, the chamber doors burst open. Valora strode in, flanked by 4 guards in ceremonial armor, her face a mask of false concern. My dear, she said, her voice dripping with sympathy, we heard screaming. Are you quite all right? Lyra struggled to compose herself, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. I'm fine. Just a nightmare. How terrible, Valora said, though her pale eyes glittered with something that might have been satisfaction. Though I suppose it's to be expected, given the stress of your new position. Perhaps some tea would help. I have a special blend that's wonderful for calming the nerves. That's kind of you, Lyra said carefully, but I think I just need rest. Of course. Valora's smile was sharp as a blade. Though I do hope you'll be feeling better tomorrow evening. The formal presentation ceremony is so important, the first time the court will see you as their future Luna Queen. Presentation ceremony? Darius's voice carried a note of warning. I don't recall authorizing any. Oh, but it's tradition, Valora interrupted smoothly. Surely you wouldn't want to deny your mate the proper recognition? The people need to see her, to know she's worthy of their loyalty. Lyra felt the trap closing around her like a noose. Whatever Valora was planning, it would happen at this ceremony, in front of the entire court. A public stage for whatever move she intended to make. Of course, Lyra said, forcing her voice to remain steady. I look forward to it. Wonderful, Valora purred. I'll make sure everything is perfect. The next evening, Lyra stood before a mirror in her chambers, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The court seamstresses had outdone themselves. Her gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk embroidered with silver thread that seemed to capture and hold the light. Her dark hair had been swept up into an elaborate style that made her look older, more regal, and the silver circlet resting on her brow marked her as future queen. She looked beautiful. She looked powerful. She looked like someone who could rule a kingdom. She also looked terrified. You don't have to go through with this, Darius said from behind her. He was resplendent in formal court attire, black and silver that made him look like a prince from a dark fairy tale. Yes, I do, Lyra replied, adjusting the circlet one final time. If I run now, they'll never respect me. Never accept me as their queen. And if this is a trap? Lyra met his eyes in the mirror. Then we spring it and deal with the consequences. The great hall had been transformed for the ceremony. Hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows on the walls, and every noble in the kingdom seemed to be in attendance. Lyra walked the length of the room on Darius's arm, her chin held high despite the weight of all those watching eyes. At the far end of the hall, a dais had been erected with two thrones, one large and imposing for the king, one smaller but equally elegant for his queen. As they approached, the crowd fell silent, and Lyra could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Lords and ladies of the Shadowmere Kingdom, Darius's voice carried clearly through the hall. I present to you Lyra Silvermoon, my chosen mate and your future Luna Queen. The applause was polite but lukewarm. Lyra had expected that. What she hadn't expected was the way some faces in the crowd looked relieved, as if they'd been holding their breath waiting for this moment. My people, she said, her voice stronger than she'd dared hope, I know my arrival here has been unexpected. I know there are questions about who I am, where I come from, whether I'm worthy of the trust you place in your rulers. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but she pressed on. I can't promise to be perfect. I can't promise to know all the answers or make all the right choices. But I can promise to serve this kingdom with everything I have. To protect our people, to stand beside your king, and to prove myself worthy of the faith you place in me. This time, the applause was warmer, more genuine. Lyra felt a flutter of hope in her chest. Maybe this could work. Maybe she really could. The blade came from nowhere, sliding between her ribs with surgical precision. Lady Valora stood behind her, a curved dagger in her hands, her beautiful face twisted with hatred and triumph. Long live the true queen, she hissed, twisting the blade viciously. The crowd erupted in screams and chaos. Lyra looked down at the ornate hilt protruding from her chest, at the blood spreading across her beautiful gown like spilled wine. She should be dying. The blade had pierced her heart. She could feel it, cold and foreign inside her chest. But instead of collapsing, instead of fading away, she felt something else entirely. Power rushed through her veins like molten silver, and the curse that had been woven into the blade, meant to ensure her death, was absorbed into her very being instead. Impossible, Valora breathed, stumbling backward. Lyra reached up and grasped the hilt of the dagger, pulling it free with one smooth motion. The wound in her chest sealed itself immediately, leaving only a tear in the silk of her gown as evidence that she'd been stabbed at all. Impossible, she agreed, her voice echoing strangely in the sudden silence. Unless you know what I really am. For a moment, just a moment, her silver eyes flashed with an otherworldly darkness that made even Darius take an involuntary step back. The shadows in the great hall seemed to bend toward her, and every candle in the room flickered as if touched by an unfelt wind. Then the moment passed, and Lyra collapsed to the marble floor like a marionette with cut strings. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Darius's face, twisted with an expression she'd never seen before. Fear. Not fear for her, but fear of her. And in the space between consciousness and oblivion, she heard that terrible voice again, closer now than it had ever been. Welcome home, little sister. Welcome home. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 4. Lyra woke to the sound of dripping water and the taste of copper in her mouth. Her tongue ran across her teeth and found something that shouldn't be there, fangs. Sharp, deadly canines that hadn't existed when she'd collapsed in the great hall. The cell around her was carved from solid stone, its walls inscribed with runes that glowed with a faint silver light. Magical containment, the kind reserved for the most dangerous supernatural threats. Iron bars reinforced with blessed silver formed the front wall, and beyond them, she could see a narrow corridor lit by torches that never seemed to burn down. You're awake. Darius sat in a chair just beyond the bars, his golden eyes haunted with exhaustion and something that might have been grief. He looked like he'd aged a decade since the ceremony, his dark hair disheveled and his royal attire replaced by simple black clothing that made him appear more like a mourner than a king. How long? Lyra's voice came out rougher than expected, with an undertone that made her shiver. It sounded predatory, hungry in ways that had nothing to do with food. 3 days. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. 3 days since you collapsed. Since you... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Since I revealed what I really am, Lyra completed, touching her new fangs with the tip of her tongue. The sensation sent an unexpected thrill through her body, not pleasure exactly, but anticipation. As if some part of her was eager to use them. The thought terrified her. The royal council is demanding your execution, Darius said quietly. They're calling you an abomination. A threat to every living thing in the kingdom. Lyra laughed, the sound harsh and bitter in the stone chamber. And what do you call me? Mine, he said without hesitation. Always mine, no matter what you become. Despite everything, the cell, the fear in his eyes, the fangs in her mouth, warmth bloomed in her chest at those words. The mate bond between them hadn't weakened, if anything, it had grown stronger since her transformation, as if her awakening hybrid nature recognized him as something worth protecting. Worth keeping. The thought came unbidden, accompanied by an image of Darius kneeling before her, his throat bared in submission. She shook her head violently, trying to dispel the fantasy, but it lingered like smoke. You should let them kill me, she whispered. Whatever I'm becoming, it's not something that should exist in this world. No. The word came out sharp as a blade. I've spent 18 years preparing to protect you. I'm not giving up now. Even if I become a monster. Darius was quiet for a long moment, his gaze studying her face with an intensity that made her skin burn. Do you remember what I told you when we were children? After you put that dandelion crown on my head? You said you were a monster, Lyra recalled, her voice soft with memory. And you said you'd be my queen anyway. He reached through the bars, his fingers barely brushing hers where she sat on the stone bench. Maybe we were always meant to be monsters together, little queen. Before Lyra could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Marcus Thorne appeared, his green eyes cold as winter ice, flanked by 2 guards in full ceremonial armor. Your Majesty, he said with a perfunctory bow. The Shadow Pact delegation has arrived. Alpha Kane is insistent about meeting with you immediately. Darius didn't move from his chair. Let him wait. With respect, my king, I don't think that's advisable. He's brought 40 warriors with him, all armed and ready for battle. This isn't a diplomatic mission, it's a show of force. Then they've made a serious mistake, Darius said conversationally, but Lyra could feel the rage building in him through their bond. No one brings an army to my court uninvited. Marcus glanced meaningfully at the cell. He's claiming right of challenge, Your Majesty. Says the hybrid belongs with a stronger alpha, one capable of controlling her. The temperature in the corridor dropped 10 degrees. Lyra watched ice crystals form on the stone walls as Darius's power leaked out in waves of barely controlled fury. He wants to challenge me, Darius said, his voice deadly quiet. For my mate. He's within his rights under the old laws, Marcus replied carefully. Trial by combat for a disputed mate claim. There's nothing disputed about it, Lyra said from inside the cell, surprised by the steel in her own voice. I'm not a prize to be won or lost. Marcus's smile was sharp as a wolf's. Actually, my lady, under the circumstances, you are. The Royal Council has voted. Until your condition is resolved, you have no legal standing. No voice in matters of succession or mate selection. Bastards, Darius snarled, rising from his chair with fluid grace. They're using this as an excuse to strip her of power. They're using this as an excuse to get rid of her, Marcus corrected. If Cain wins the challenge, he claims both her and whatever abilities come with her bloodline. If you win but she's still deemed too dangerous. He shrugged. Well, accidents happen in combat. Lyra felt something cold and terrible unfurl in her chest. They're planning to kill me either way. Not if I have anything to say about it, Darius growled. You may not, a new voice said from the shadows at the end of the corridor. Lady Valora emerged from the darkness, her silver blonde hair gleaming in the torchlight. Despite her assassination attempt 3 days ago, she walked free and unrestrained. The council has voted no confidence in your judgment, nephew. Where matters of kingdom security are concerned, they have the right to act independently. Treason, Darius said flatly. Pragmatism, Valora corrected. That creature in the cell isn't the sweet little healer you fell in love with 18 years ago. She's something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist. I'm right here, Lyra said dryly. You can address me directly. Valora turned her pale blue gaze on the cell, and Lyra saw something flicker in her expression, fear, quickly masked but unmistakably there. What you are, she said carefully, is a threat to the natural order. Hybrids are abominations, neither one thing nor the other. They bring nothing but death and chaos. Funny, Lyra mused, flexing her hands and watching her nails extend into claws without her conscious command. I was thinking the same thing about treacherous ants. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Valora took an involuntary step backward, her hand moving to her throat. You see, she said, addressing Darius without taking her eyes off Lyra. Already she's more monster than woman. How long before she starts seeing us all as prey? Maybe I already do, Lyra said softly, and felt a dark satisfaction as Valora went pale. That's enough, Darius snapped, his voice carrying enough alpha dominance to make everyone in the corridor bare their necks. Aunt, you will return to your chambers and stay there. Marcus, you will delay Cain as long as possible. I need time to. His words were cut off by a sound that made every hair on Lyra's body stand on end, a howl that was too low, too resonant, too alien to have come from any natural wolf. It echoed through the castle's stone walls like the cry of something ancient and hungry. What was that? Marcus demanded, his hand moving instinctively to his sword. The howl came again, closer this time, and with it came a scent that made Lyra's new fangs ache with hunger. Blood. Death. And underneath it all, something that smelled like home. She's here, Lyra whispered, her silver eyes going wide with realization. Oh gods, she's actually here. Who? Darius demanded, but Lyra was already moving, pressing herself against the bars of her cell as understanding crashed over her like a tide. My aunt, she gasped. Not Valora, my mother's sister. Morgana. The name fell into the corridor like a stone into still water, creating ripples of recognition and terror. Even Valora stumbled backward, her face going ashen. Impossible, she breathed. Morgana Silvermoon died 200 years ago. No, Lyra said, pieces of memory and inherited knowledge clicking into place like puzzle pieces. She was transformed into something that should never have existed. And she's been waiting, planning, orchestrating everything to get me to this point. Another howl split the air, and this time it was accompanied by the sound of screams from somewhere deep within the castle. Human screams, cut short with sudden, violent finality. She's in the castle, Marcus said, his face grim. How many are with her? It doesn't matter, Lyra said hollowly. She doesn't need an army. She is one. The lights in the corridor began to flicker, and a temperature drop sent frost racing along the stone walls. When the torches steadied, a figure stood at the far end of the corridor, a woman who looked like an older version of Lyra, if Lyra had been carved from moonlight and shadow. Morgana Silvermoon was beautiful in the way that avalanches were beautiful, terrible and irresistible and absolutely destructive. Her long silver hair moved in a breeze that existed only around her, and her eyes were the deep crimson of freshly spilled blood. When she smiled, her fangs gleamed like ivory daggers. Hello, little niece, she said, her voice carrying the whisper of centuries. You've grown into quite the beauty. Just like your mother. Velora made a strangled sound and fled, her heels clicking against stone as she ran. Marcus drew his sword, but his hands were shaking so badly the blade rattled against the scabbard. Morgana, Darius said quietly, stepping between the ancient hybrid and the cell. You're not welcome here. Oh, but I am, she purred, gliding forward with inhuman grace. I'm family. And family, well, family takes care of family. Her red gaze fixed on Lyra. Your father's journals made for fascinating reading, little one. All his desperate attempts to suppress what you are, to keep you weak and human. What journals? Lyra demanded. Morgana waved her hand, and a leather-bound book appeared on the stone floor of the cell, just within Lyra's reach. Read, child. Learn the truth about your heritage. About what was done to us. Lyra picked up the journal with trembling hands, recognizing her father's careful handwriting on the first page. The date was just weeks before his death. My dearest Lyra, the entry began, if you are reading this, then I have failed in my greatest duty, keeping you safe from the truth of what you are. Her eyes scanned the pages rapidly, each word hitting her like a physical blow. Her mother hadn't been killed by rogues. She'd been murdered by vampire hunters who'd tracked her bloodline for centuries, determined to eliminate the hybrid strain before it could spread. Her father's research hadn't been about forbidden magic at all, it had been a desperate attempt to find a way to suppress Lyra's inevitable transformation. The bloodline is ancient, one passage read, older than the first werewolf packs, older than vampire covens. They were the bridge between worlds, the balance between life and death. But power like that, it corrupts. It consumes. Your Aunt Morgana is proof of that. Another page detailed his growing horror as he realized the truth about his wife's family. She was the last pure one, the last of her line who chose humanity over hunger. But the blood remembers, and it calls to its own. Already I see signs in Lyra, the silver eyes, the unnatural strength, the way shadows bend toward her when she's emotional. The transformation is inevitable, but perhaps I can delay it. Perhaps I can give her a normal life, at least for a while. The final entry was written in a shaking hand. I've failed. The binding spell I crafted won't hold much longer. Lyra's power is growing too strong, and Morgana grows closer to finding us. Tonight, I perform the final ritual. I'll use my own life force to create a prison for the ancient evil I accidentally awakened in my research, the thing Morgana has become allied with. If I succeed, it will buy Lyra time. If I fail, may the moon goddess forgive me for the monster I may have helped create. Lyra looked up from the journal to find Morgana watching her with something that might have been fondness. Now you understand, the ancient hybrid said softly. Your father tried to cage what you are, to make you less than your birthright. But I've come to set you free. Free to become what? Lyra asked, though part of her already knew the answer. What we were always meant to be, Morgana replied, her red eyes gleaming. Queens of both worlds, rulers of the space between life and death. The old bloodlines are awakening, child. The time of hiding is over. And if I refuse? Morgana's smile turned sharp as broken glass. Then everyone you care about dies. Starting with him. She nodded toward Darius, who had gone very still beside the cell. As if summoned by her words, chaos erupted from deeper in the castle. Shouts, the clash of steel on steel, inhuman roars that spoke of battle and blood. Through the stone walls, Lyra could feel the terror of the castle's inhabitants as something ancient and terrible hunted through the corridors. The Shadow Pack? Darius asked grimly. Among others, Morgana confirmed. I've gathered quite the collection of allies over the years. Vampires who remember the old days, werewolves who chafe under modern pack law, humans who seek power beyond their mortal limitations. Her smile widened. They're all eager to serve the new order. Another scream echoed through the castle, closer this time. Lyra could smell blood in the air, could hear the wet sounds of violence drawing nearer with every passing moment. Choose quickly, little niece, Morgana said, her voice taking on an edge of impatience. Embrace what you are, or watch this place burn with everyone in it still inside. Lyra looked at Darius, saw the resolution in his golden eyes. He would fight, she knew. He would die before he let Morgana take her, and his death would accomplish nothing except adding one more name to the list of people who'd suffered because of what she was. The mate bond between them pulsed with his determination, his love, his absolute refusal to abandon her even in the face of impossible odds. And beneath that, she felt something else, his faith in her. His belief that whatever she became, some part of the woman he loved would remain. There's another option, Lyra said quietly, rising from the stone bench. Her reflection in the cell's mirror showed her the truth. Silver eyes that now held flecks of red, fangs that gleamed in the torchlight, and something predatory in her posture that hadn't been there before. Oh. Morgana raised an eyebrow. And what might that be? Lyra placed her hands on the iron bars of her cell, feeling the blessed silver burn her palms. But instead of pulling back, she pushed her power into the metal, watching as it began to glow and bend under the force of her hybrid strength. I choose to be what I've always been, she said, her voice carrying new harmonics that made the stone walls vibrate. A healer. A protector. And if that means becoming a monster to fight monsters. The bars shattered like glass, silver fragments raining to the floor as power erupted from her in waves that shook the very foundations of the castle. When the light faded, Lyra stood free, her silver eyes now burning with crimson fire, her fangs fully extended, and shadows writhing around her like living things. But when she looked at Darius, her expression was still unmistakably her own. Then so be it, she finished, her voice echoing with the authority of something ancient and terrible and absolutely committed to protecting what it loved. Above them, through layers of stone and timber, the blood moon rose in a sky turned crimson with promise and threat. And in the depths of the castle, something that had once been human and was now something far more dangerous stepped out of its prison and prepared to wage war against the darkness. Even if she had to become the darkness to do it. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 5. The Great Hall had been transformed into a battlefield. Ancient tapestries hung in smoking tatters, their golden threads scattered across marble floors slick with blood. Overturned tables and shattered crystal created a maze of obstacles between the massive columns that supported the vaulted ceiling. The air itself seemed to crackle with opposing magics, Morgana's dark energy writhing against Lyra's silver-crimson power like living things locked in mortal combat. Lyra stood at the center of the destruction, her formal gown replaced by practical leathers that moved with her like a second skin. The transformation had changed more than just her appearance. Her silver hair now held streaks of deep red that caught the firelight like liquid rubies, and when she moved, shadows bent toward her in acknowledgement of what she'd become. But her eyes, those were still unmistakably her own. Silver shot through with crimson, yes, but filled with the same compassion and determination that had driven her to heal instead of harm. "You disappoint me, little niece," Morgana said, circling her with predatory grace. The ancient hybrid had shed all pretense of humanity, her form shifting between woman and something far more dangerous. Her silver hair whipped around her in an unfelt wind, and her red eyes burned with centuries of accumulated rage. "I expected you to embrace your birthright with more enthusiasm." "I have embraced it," Lyra replied, her voice carrying new harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. "Just not the way you wanted." Around them, the battle raged on multiple fronts. Darius fought with fluid violence against Vincent Kane's warriors, his golden eyes blazing with alpha fury as he carved through their ranks. The Shadow Pack Alpha himself hung back, his calculating gaze moving between the two hybrid women as if weighing his options. "You think love makes you strong," Morgana continued, her form solidifying as she prepared to strike. "But love is weakness. It binds you to mortals, makes you vulnerable to their frailties." "Love makes me human," Lyra corrected, raising her hands as silver-red energy coalesced around her fingers. "And humanity is what you lost along the way." Morgana's laugh was like breaking glass. "Humanity? I watched humans burn our kind for centuries, little one. I saw your grandmother torn apart by their so-called hunters while she tried to heal their sick children. I held your mother while she died, begging me to protect you from the very blood that flows in our veins." The words hit Lyra like physical blows, but she held her ground. "And that pain turned you into exactly what they feared we were. A monster who feeds on death and darkness. I became what was necessary." Morgana snarled, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "While you lived in ignorant bliss, I spent 2 centuries gathering power, building alliances, preparing for the day when we could take our rightful place as rulers of both worlds." "Rulers?" Lyra shook her head, understanding flooding through her like dawn breaking. "You don't want to rule, Aunt Morgana. You want to destroy. To make them all pay for what was done to our family." The ancient hybrid went very still. "Perhaps. Would that be so wrong?" "Yes," Lyra said softly. "Because it would make their worst fears about us true." Before Morgana could respond, Vincent Kane's voice cut through the chaos of battle. "Enough of this family drama," he snarled, stepping forward with a weapon that made Lyra's blood freeze. The blade in his hands was black as midnight and seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, a vampire fang forged into a sword, designed specifically for killing hybrids. "Vincent," Darius growled, turning from the warrior he'd just defeated. "This doesn't concern you." "On the contrary," the Shadow Pack Alpha replied, his green eyes gleaming with avarice. "It concerns me greatly. Do you have any idea what the vampire covens would pay for 2 living hybrids? What kind of army I could build with their blood?" Lyra felt Morgana's rage spike beside her, but her aunt's fury was nothing compared to the cold horror that washed over her at Vincent's revelation. "You're not here for political alliance," she breathed. "You're here to harvest us." "Very good," Vincent said with a mocking bow. "Though I prefer the term strategic acquisition. The vampire covens have been searching for hybrid blood for decades. Something about its unique properties, the perfect fusion of life and death magic. A few drops can turn an ordinary vampire into something far more powerful." "Over my dead body," Darius snarled, moving to place himself between Vincent and Lyra. "That can certainly be arranged," Vincent replied, raising the blackened blade. "Though it seems a waste. You could have ruled beside me, Blackthorn. Instead, you chose to shackle yourself to an abomination." The insult sparked something primal in Lyra's chest, not her human heart, but the hybrid soul that recognized threats to her mate. Power erupted from her in a wave that sent Vincent stumbling backward, his eyes wide with sudden fear. "Call me that again," she said conversationally, "and I'll show you exactly what kind of abomination I can be." But Vincent wasn't alone. At his signal, figures emerged from the shadows at the edges of the Great Hall, vampires, their pale skin unmarked by the battle raging around them, their fangs gleaming in the firelight. Behind them came more of Vincent's wolves, their eyes reflecting an unnatural green glow that spoke of magical enhancement. "You see," Vincent said, his confidence returning as his reinforcements took position. "I've been preparing for this moment far longer than you might think. The vampire covens aren't just my customers. They're my partners. Together, we're going to usher in a new age of supernatural cooperation." "Under your rule, I suppose," Morgana said dryly, though Lyra could feel her aunt's attention shifting, calculating new threats. "Under the rule of those strong enough to seize power," Vincent corrected. "Which is why I'm willing to make you both an offer. Surrender now, donate a reasonable amount of blood to the cause, and I'll ensure your deaths are quick and relatively painless." "Generous," Lyra said, matching his mocking tone. "But I have a counter-offer." She reached out through the mate bond, feeling Darius's steady presence like an anchor in the storm of her transforming nature. His love flowed back to her, not the desperate, possessive hunger she'd felt from other alphas, but something deeper. Trust. Faith. The absolute certainty that whatever she became, she would always be his Lyra at heart. That love steadied her, gave her the courage to do what needed to be done. "Surrender now," she told Vincent, her voice carrying the authority of something ancient and terrible, "and I might let you live to see tomorrow." Vincent's laughter died as the temperature in the great hall plummeted. Frost began forming on the marble columns, and the shadows deepened until the torches seemed like islands of light in an ocean of darkness. But it wasn't Lyra's power causing the change. It was Morgana's. "Enough," the ancient hybrid said, her voice echoing with centuries of accumulated rage. "I came here to claim my niece, not to watch her be bartered away like livestock." Her red eyes fixed on Vincent with laser intensity. "You want to know what hybrid blood can really do? Let me show you." She moved faster than lightning, covering the distance between herself and Vincent in the space between heartbeats. Her claws, extended to their full length, punched through his chest armor like it was made of paper. But instead of killing him outright, she grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. 2 centuries, she whispered, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. 2 centuries I've been hunting your kind. Vampires who think our blood is a commodity. Wolves who see us as weapons to be wielded. Humans who fear what they can't understand." Vincent gasped, his face turning purple as Morgana's grip tightened. "You can't, the covens will. The covens will learn what happens to those who threaten my family," Morgana finished, her free hand beginning to glow with that terrible dark energy. "Aunt Morgana, stop." Lyra's voice cut through the violence like a blade. "This isn't the way." "It's the only way," Morgana replied without loosening her grip. "They'll never stop hunting us, child. Never stop trying to use us. The only language they understand is fear." "And what happens after you've killed them all?" Lyra asked, stepping closer despite the danger radiating from her aunt. "When there's no one left to fight? What do you become then?" For the first time since she'd appeared, Morgana hesitated. We rule. We create a world where our kind never has to hide again." "A world of corpses," Lyra said gently. "A kingdom of the dead, with only us left to rule over the ashes." "Better than living in chains," Morgana snarled, but some of the certainty had gone out of her voice. "Is it?" Lyra moved closer, her hand extended in invitation. "Or is it just another kind of prison? You've spent 2 centuries becoming exactly what they said we were, monsters who feed on death and destruction. Where's the victory in proving their worst fears right?" "They killed your grandmother," Morgana said, but the words came out broken, desperate. "They murdered your mother. They would have done the same to you if your father hadn't hidden you away." "I know," Lyra said softly. "And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all the pain our family has suffered, all the losses you've had to bear alone." She took another step, close enough now that Vincent's struggles were brushing against her arm. "But becoming a monster won't bring them back. It won't heal the wounds or ease the loneliness. Then what will?" The question came out as a whisper, centuries of pain and isolation bleeding through Morgana's carefully maintained facade. "This," Lyra said, and placed her hands on either side of her aunt's face. The moment their skin connected, power flowed between them, not the dark, consuming energy Morgana had wielded, but something different. Something that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, like the first warm day after a brutal winter. Lyra poured her own pain into the connection, her fear of becoming a monster, her grief for the father she'd lost, her terror at the transformation she couldn't control. But alongside the darkness, she shared something else. Love. Hope. The absolute certainty that monsters could choose to be better, that even the darkest heritage could be transformed into something beautiful. Morgana gasped, her grip on Vincent loosening as waves of foreign emotion crashed over her. For the first time in 2 centuries, she felt what it was like to be connected to someone who understood her pain but hadn't let it consume them. "I'm so tired," she whispered, tears streaming down her face like liquid silver. "So tired of being alone." "You're not alone anymore," Lyra promised, her own tears mixing with her aunt's. "You have me. You have family who understands what you've been through." Vincent chose that moment to break free, gasping as he stumbled backward. But instead of fleeing, he raised the hybrid killing blade with a snarl of rage. "Touching reunion," he wheezed, "but it ends now." The blade swept toward Lyra's exposed back, its edge gleaming with deadly promise. But before it could connect, another figure threw herself into its path. Lady Valora screamed as the blackened steel punched through her chest, her silver blonde hair whipping around her face as she collapsed to the marble floor. Blood spread beneath her like spilled wine, but her pale blue eyes remained fixed on Darius with something that might have been love. "Valora." Darius was at her side in an instant, his hands glowing with healing energy as he tried to stop the bleeding. "Too late," she gasped, her fingers closing around his wrist. "The blade, it's cursed. Made to kill hybrids, but it works on anyone with enough magical blood." Her gaze found Lyra, and her expression softened. "I was wrong about you, child. Wrong about what you could become." "Save your strength," Darius said urgently, pouring more power into his healing attempt. "No," Valora whispered, her grip tightening. "Listen to me. Vincent isn't the only one. There are others, covens and packs working together. They call themselves the Purest Alliance." Her voice was growing weaker with each word. "They want to eliminate all hybrids, all mixed bloodlines. You're just the beginning." "Why are you telling us this?" Lyra asked, kneeling beside the dying woman. Valora's smile was sad and beautiful. "Because I finally understand what your father died trying to protect. Not just you, but the hope you represent. The possibility of something better than what we've always been." Her eyes closed, and her hand fell away from Darius's wrist. Lady Valora Blackthorn, who had spent her life accumulating power and influence, died protecting the very person she'd tried to destroy just days before. "The Purest Alliance," Morgana said, her voice hollow with newfound understanding. "I've been so focused on fighting individual threats that I missed the larger pattern. They're not just hunting us, they're organizing." "Then we organize too," Lyra said, rising from beside Valora's still form. Her silver-crimson eyes burned with determination as she looked around the devastated Great Hall. "Not to destroy, but to build. To create something better." "What are you suggesting?" Darius asked, his voice thick with grief for his aunt. "A new kind of pack," Lyra replied. "One that welcomes hybrids instead of fearing them. One that proves love is stronger than hatred, connection stronger than isolation." "Pretty words," Vincent sneered from where he crouched near the hall's entrance, his chest still bleeding from Morgana's attack. "But words won't stop what's coming. The Purest Alliance has resources you can't imagine, allies in every major pack and coven." "Then it's a good thing I'm not fighting them alone," Lyra said, extending her hand toward Morgana. For a moment, her aunt hesitated. 2 centuries of hatred and isolation warred with the promise of something different, something better. Then, slowly, she reached out and took Lyra's offered hand. The moment their fingers touched, power exploded through the great hall, not destructive this time, but transformative. The broken marble began to repair itself, the shattered windows reassembled from fragments of colored glass, and the torn tapestries rewove themselves with threads of silver and gold. More than that, the magic reached beyond the physical realm. Every supernatural being in the castle felt it, a pulse of pure possibility, the promise of a future where hybrid and pure blood, vampire and werewolf, human and other could coexist without fear. "This is how it begins," Lyra said, her voice carrying to every corner of the restored hall. "Not with conquest or domination, but with healing. With choosing love over hatred, hope over despair." Vincent snarled and raised his blade one final time, but he never got the chance to strike. Darius moved with alpha swiftness, his claws finding Vincent's throat before the other man could react. The Shadow Pack Alpha fell without ceremony, his schemes dying with him. "Is it over?" Morgana asked, her red eyes searching Lyra's face. "The battle is," Lyra replied. "But the real work is just beginning." 3 months later, the Great Hall looked nothing like the battlefield it had been. Sunlight streamed through the restored windows, illuminating a scene that would have been impossible just weeks before. Werewolves mingled with vampires, humans sat beside hybrids, and at the center of it all, 2 thrones stood side by side, one carved from silver-veined marble, the other from midnight black obsidian. Lyra stood before those thrones now, wearing a gown that seemed to be cut from starlight itself. The silver fabric shimmered with every movement, and the crown on her head was unlike anything the werewolf world had ever seen, forged from both silver and obsidian, set with gems that caught and held light like captured rainbows. The hybrid Luna Queen, the officiating elder intoned, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed hall. "Protector of all bloodlines, guardian of the bridges between worlds." But Lyra's attention wasn't on the formal ceremony or the hundreds of witnesses. It was on Darius, who stood waiting beside his throne, his own crown catching the light like captured fire. His golden eyes held the same love and wonder they'd held 18 years ago when a 6-year-old girl had placed dandelions in his hair. "I told you I'd be your queen," she whispered as she approached, her voice too low for anyone but him to hear. "And I told you I was a monster," he replied, his smile sharp and beautiful and completely unrepentant. "Thank you for proving we could be monsters together, and still choose love." She placed a crown of night-blooming flowers on his head, just as she'd done with dandelions so many years ago. But this time, when their eyes met, there was no uncertainty. No fear of what they might become. "Always," she said, taking his hand as they turned to face their people, werewolf and vampire, human and hybrid, all united under the promise of something better than what had come before. Their love story had begun with a child's innocent promise and survived transformation, betrayal, and the weight of impossible expectations. It had proven that even the darkest heritage could be transformed into something beautiful, that monsters could choose to heal instead of harm. And as the blood moon set and a new dawn rose over the kingdom, Lyra and Darius Blackthorn stepped into their future together, 2 souls who had kept the promises they'd made as children, even when the world tried to convince them those promises were impossible. Sometimes, they had learned, the most powerful magic of all was simply refusing to let go of love, no matter how dark the world became around you. Sometimes, that was enough to change everything. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also, to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.